Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and well, it's very good to come to Rome again. And I was thinking that I was in here last year, more or less around this time, and thinking a little bit how the world evolved since last time 1 year ago. So we are definitely in an evolving world. So thank you very much to Ivas, to President Rossi for the invitation, of course, to be in here. As I said, always a pleasure. Last year, I remember that our discussions were focused on the long-awaited implementation of Solvency II. This year, as we know, the focus is on how Solvency II and small and medium-sized insurers, and how, of course, can we discuss how to better proceed in this area. I really welcome this. I think that small and medium-sized insurers are, of course, an important segment of the European insurance market. I always said during the process of building Solvency II that we were building Solvency II for everybody in the market, not only for the bigger companies. Now, there's issues, of course, as President Rossi mentioned, about consolidation. These are things that I think we need to discuss not in a passionate way. I think that to be rational, to understand how the economy and how the markets are evolving also, and to see, of course, that there will be always, in my opinion, good possibilities to have small and medium-sized companies having a differentiated factor and having a good provision of services and products to consumers. And I think that Solvency II doesn't kill that. Now, the jury is out there, and of course we need to analyze and to be brave enough to correct things if they're not going in the right way. So that's my overall message on this. In my intervention today, I will try to cover three main aspects. First of all, proportionality in Solvency II, and trying to distinguish a little bit between regulatory and supervisory proportionality, because these are two important things. Secondly, you would not be surprised, supervisory convergence in the insurance market in Europe, which I think it's the most important issue also for small and medium-sized insurers. And finally, the challenges and also the opportunities coming from the digitalization and all this new technology that is being used, which I think is a challenge but also an opportunity for small and medium-sized insurers. So firstly, on proportionality in Solvency II. As you know, on the regulatory side, the Solvency II framework takes into account in I would say, an extensive way, the principle of proportionality. Requirements should be applied in a way that is proportionate to the nature, scale, and complexity of the risks, and not of the companies, of the risks inherent in the business. This principle is defined in the directive, and there are a good number of concrete applications in the different regulatory texts, including, of course, on the EIOPA guidelines. Just a few examples. The implementing acts include simplified calculations on the technical provisions and on some modules of the Solvency Capital Requirement Standard Formula. The guidelines on the loss absorbing capacity foresee the simplified calculations when you do this at group level. The technical standards on reporting, very importantly, foresee the possibility of the use of exemptions by supervisors, allowing for up to 20% of the market to be exempted from the quarterly reporting and from the annual asset-by-asset quantitative reporting. Also, the combination of key functions in the system of governance is allowed under certain specific circumstances. So these are all concrete examples on how proportionality is already included in the regulatory framework. And of course, from our side at EIOPA, we are and we will continue to be very attentive on how this is implemented then in real world, how the proportionality principle is implemented in Solvency II. And I think that it's on top of course, of what is in the regulatory text. I think that there's an element which is of fundamental importance. It is about the attitude from supervisory authorities towards proportionality. And this is something that, let's be honest, it will not be there in a consistent way just like that. We will need to have some time. We will need to have, of course, also the possibility to have a good understanding and then to come, hopefully, with more, collective, I would say, decisions on this. So the supervisory attitude towards proportionality is key, I would say, to ensure that the objectives of Solvency II are achieved. And we are working on this. We issued recently a report on the use of proportionality in the reporting requirements, so the first analysis that we made on that. We are running right now a peer review on the key functions on the system of governance with a particular emphasis on proportionality. So this peer review is assessing national practices on how to supervise and decide if the undertaking's setting of the key functions fulfills the requirements in the directive, but also examining the criteria for combining different functions, and also what are the supervisory expectations with regard to the fit and proper requirements on the key function holders. So we are definitely looking on how different member states are approaching this issue of key functions from a proportionality perspective. But also in the development of our work, for example, in the supervisory handbook that we are building, we always include concrete elements and concrete examples on good practices on the proportionate implementation of Solvency II within the supervisory process. And this, I think, it's very, very much important. But let me also be very clear. It is also fundamental to ensure that proportionality is well understood by everybody, supervisors and industry. Proportionality does not mean not applying the requirements. It means applying them in a manner that is in line with the nature, the scale, and the complexity of the risks inherent in the business. And very importantly, by allowing the requirements to be implemented in a proportionate way, supervisors should focus their attention on making sure that we achieve the desired transformation and change from the previous regime. For example, on the Pillar 2 governance requirements, while accepting different and proportionate implementation of the key functions, it is extremely important to ensure that the cultural change on risk governance is a reality. That's why we have the requirements on governance. We should not forget that bad governance was identified as one of the most relevant causes of solvency problems in the insurance companies in the past. So the real test should be to assess if in substance and not in form, we tackle a number of important issues that were identified in the past. Like, for example, do you use the 4 eyes principle when you have a dominant CEO in your company? What is the level of effective challenge provided by the board to the management? How, in practice, the risk management functions contribute to the definition of the business strategies and for product governance? How conflicts of interest are managed by insurers' management in the context of financial conglomerates? These are the real issues that we want to solve. It's not about, I always say this, it's not about having nice 200, 300 pages of documents. It's about making sure that when we implement governance requirements, we achieve and we deal with these elements that we saw in a bad way in the market. And of course, proportionality needs to be there, but we need to achieve the outcomes in relation to these specific issues. And also, very importantly, let me mention one thing. Proportionality works both ways. So it means that for higher, more complex, more risky types of business, companies should be subject to higher requirements and enhanced supervisory attention. And the clear example in here is, of course, when companies use internal models for the calculation of their capital requirements. So proportionality works both ways. EIOPA is keen on ensuring a sound implementation of proportionality in Solvency II. We want to work together with national competent authorities to identify good practices in this area and provide guidance on supervisory approaches that privilege substance over form. This will be fundamental to ensure level playing fields throughout Europe and avoid the emergence of different standards of proportionality. The experience gathered in the first years of implementation will help us all to adjust the regime and make it more proportionate. The first opportunity is the review of the standard formula requirements, as Mr. Rossi mentioned, which is envisaged to be there in 2018. As you know, EIOPA recently launched a discussion paper on the review of the SCR, and we very much welcome, of course, the engagement of the Italian insurance industry in this consultation. While we identify a number of concrete technical areas where the review will be focused, it is also very important to understand what are the main objectives that we set for this review. First one, to try to reduce complexity. Second one, precisely to enhance proportionality. And third one, to keep ensuring a proper risk sensitiveness while avoiding procyclicality. So we welcome concrete suggestions on ways to enhance proportionality in Pillar 1 requirements through the use of simplified methodologies or undertaking specific parameters. We are open to that. But I continue to believe that proportionality in solvency requirements should be achieved by the use of simplified methodologies, and that all undertakings should be subject to the same quantitative solvency requirements. I think it's not because you're smaller that you should build weaker technical provisions. It's not because you're smaller that you should have less capital to withstand shocks according to the risks that you run. This will be, I would say, a bad outcome for consumers, but let me say more. It will be also a bad outcome for the small and medium-sized companies, because they should then start to be seen as a kind of a second-class type of companies. I think this would not be a good outcome. So from a consumer protection perspective, and policyholder protection is the main objective of Solvency II, as you know, I think it is key to ensure that all market players are subject to the same basic solvency requirements, of course, with due proportionality simplifications in the application of the Pillar 1 requirements. On my second point, on supervisory convergence, the key challenge for EIOPA in the coming years is, of course, to build and to put in place a common European supervisory culture. To ensure supervisory convergence, the insurance supervisory community needs to have a common interpretation of the laws and regulations, a common understanding of supervisory objectives, and a common view on the key characteristics of good and effective supervision. Only a common supervisory culture will ensure an equal level playing field, prevent supervisory arbitrage, and safeguard a similar level of protection to all policyholders throughout the EU. Let me mention a number of EIOPA initiatives in this area. We're building an handbook of good supervisory practices in Solvency II and a corresponding training program for national supervisors. We're using the centralized database of Solvency II data to develop the reliable risk analysis and early warning indicators, both at individual, group, and macro-wide level, and to provide the national authorities with peer group comparisons. We're doing bilateral visits to national authorities, providing independent feedback and challenging supervisory practices. We're creating cooperation platforms between EIOPA and the concerned supervisory authorities in situations where cross-border risks following branch or the freedom to provide service activities pose important challenges to supervision. We are supporting improvements in national supervision in exercises such as the balance sheet reviews that we have done in Romania and recently in Bulgaria, adding credibility to the market. And finally, we are implementing a strategy on preventive risk-based conduct supervision, using thematic reviews and retail risk indicators to prioritize actions on areas of possible emerging consumer detriment. Let me be very clear on this. In order to preserve the internal market and the corresponding freedoms, we need to ensure that in all member states there is a high level quality of supervision, and that this supervision is done in a consistent way throughout Europe. This is a fundamental element to preserve the internal market, and if we don't tackle it, we will regret it later on. We cannot have situations where weaker supervisory standards are used to arbitrage the system. Situations where individuals are considered not to be fit and proper in one country and they are assessed differently in another country. Situations where companies are set up in one country but they mostly do business in other countries without a proper assessment of the risks and not provisioning adequately their liabilities. We cannot have very different supervisory practices and challenging undertakings on the sustainability of certain business models. We cannot have situations where, due to prioritization of supervisory resources, only marginal attention is given to business written in foreign countries. These are concrete situations that we need to tackle. And in this area, we are increasing our work. We recently approved in our board a new decision on the exchange of information between national authorities, increasing the cooperation between home and host before the licensing process and during ongoing supervision. Going forward, ladies and gentlemen, EIOPA should have a clear mandate on ensuring supervisory convergence, on having independent assessments of supervisory practices and the corresponding recommendations to national authorities. A stronger mandate on coordinating cross-border supervisory issues, and a centralization of the approval and the ongoing monitor of internal models. Finally, on the challenge of digitalization. Small and medium-sized insurers, of course, will also be subject to new challenges like the increased digitalization and the use of technology, as Mr. Rossi mentioned. While this brings risks, it also creates opportunities. I believe that small and medium-sized insurers will have a great opportunity with InsurTech to explore niche and segmented markets and develop its differentiation and innovative proposals of products and services to consumers. The use of big data and telematics, comparison websites, automated advisor tools, the Internet of Things, all of these will impact, of course, the way providers interact with consumers. The increasing amount of personal data available and the power of data analytics will inevitably change insurance underwriting models. This has the potential to produce better outcomes for customers, but also brings new risks. While I strongly believe that regulation should be technological neutral, we should be attentive to ensure that we keep a high level of consumer protection while not hindering innovation. EIOPA is keen on involving supervisors, the traditional insurance industry, and the new insurtechs, and especially the small and medium-sized insurers, in a constructive dialogue to identify the key areas and build fair and proportionate responses. We are organizing what we call InsurTech roundtables. The first of one will be at the end of April. In these roundtables, we want to discuss issues like the use of testing approaches, the usually called sandboxes, from a supervisory perspective. Where in the insurance value chain are the biggest opportunities and risks from a digitalization perspective? But also the ethical standards that are followed by companies on the use of personal data, and how the underwriting models are changing due to the personalization of pricing, but also how they deal with exclusion that can come, of course, from a consumer perspective. Closely linked to digitalization is, of course, the issue of cyber risk. Insurers, including, of course, small and medium-sized players, will be possessing and using more and more bigger and bigger amounts of personal data. The risk of cyber attacks is increasing, and insurers will be key potential targets. Let's be honest on this. I think that this poses a tremendous challenge from an operational perspective on ensuring that proper IT security systems are implemented and tested. The increased use of the cloud and the dependency on external service providers, which, by the way, it's much more on the small and medium-sized insurers, this dependency on external service providers only increases the complexity of managing this huge operational risk. And this could also bring some systemic consequences if you look at the potential for concentration that exists, for example, in the cloud services. On the other side, cyber risk also represents an opportunity for the sector. It was mentioned. The development of insurance coverage for these risks is evolving, and it should be done in a sound basis according, of course, to the amount of information that is provided for pricing. Nevertheless, I would say that particular attention should already be given today to the exposures to cyber risk accumulation in the current portfolios, even in situations where you don't have cyber coverages, the so-called silent coverages that are already in the books. In conclusion, applying requirements in a proportionate way is a balancing act. We should identify concrete elements where burden should be reduced because it's not adding value. In this case, it's only a cost. It's not an investment. But of course, we need to make sure that we achieve the desired outcomes with the new risk-based regime. Secondly, policyholder protection and market stability in a single market construction is only achieved if we ensure high quality and consistent supervision throughout the EU. The system will be as strong as its weakest link. Thirdly, digitalization is here to stay, and we better embrace it and use it as an opportunity to provide better services and products to consumers. I strongly believe that if we work together as supervisors in Europe, national authorities, and of course with the market and with the different stakeholders, we can make Solvency II a success. A success that will be measured, of course, by the fact that it will be fit for purpose. And that is something that I'm quite keen on ensuring and quite keen on making sure that if we found elements where there is detriment, where there is only cost, that we tackle it and we adjust it. That's the way that, of course, regulatory regimes should move. That's why I'm quite keen on having evidence-based analysis and reviews of the regimes. And we should do it together in a frank and a cooperative manner for the benefit of the industry and for the benefit, at the end of the day, of the ones that we are in here to protect, consumers, all of us. And when I talk about EIOPA, let me say a final message on this. I'm quite proud of being the face of EIOPA. I'm very happy to take criticisms, to discuss, to take, of course, the heat. Very often it happens, it's good. But I'm just a face. When we talk about EIOPA having more powers, it's not me. It's all of us in Europe. It's these people that is seated in here. It's people like Alberto, it's people like Sylvia, like Michu, like Jean. People that I accepted, and I really recognize experience, value, commitment to the European values and ideal. Please, let's make Europe together. Let's not devilish European institutions. Let's build Europe together, united in diversity, as the motto of Europe is there. And having the courage to put the difficult issues, the bad practices, and to evolve together. Thank you very much.